Well, welcome back to the One Big Thing podcast. I'm your host, Steve Campbell. I think my prior guests at this point are all out competing each other for who can refer the most amount of friends in their network to this show. When you hear this episode, we will be into our first full year plus of recording. We'll have almost 30 episodes at this point. And what's been neat is my first few guests that I knew from my past that were willing to come on to take a risk to meet me with the vision that I had and record shows were some of my most incredible first conversations to really do what this One Big Thing is all about, which is helping you move the ball forward. And one of my first guests was Brett Magpiong, and Brett and I had met in San Diego. We had an unbelievable conversation talking about his history and wealth management and the book he's written with the Delta Theorem. And when I get done with every episode, I always ask people, Brett, like, who do you know that I could interview? And I think Brett, if this is very Brett, might have been at the beach a few weeks ago when I had texted him, hey, you were on my heart, got anybody you can think of. And when you see those little bubbles pop up on your iPhone, they just wouldn't stop. And so Brett sent me name one, the bubbles came up name two, and he was just rattling off names of people in his network. And I can say that from those I've had the honor of interviewing that know Brett, they are definitely an extension of who he is. And I would tell you that even before we jump into this conversation today with Dr. Diego Gutierrez, that you need to surround yourself with people that can bring the best out of you, that can sharpen you. And just life is too short. It's too precious. And so with that, Dr. Diego Gutierrez and I, friend of Brett Magpiong's, had some FaceTime. I was sitting outside a grocery store. He texted me and I said, hey, are you willing to come on the show and talk? And so it's neat when you go from that FaceTime call to the actual day of recording and just the anticipation. And so I know we've both been looking forward to this conversation. But for Diego, for those that don't know you, obviously Brett had referred you to me. Why don't you kind of share us, who you are and what you're working on?
Sure. My name is Dr. Diego Gutierrez. I am a college professor. I teach management and marketing at Rutgers University, the Hellsberg School of Management here in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been in Kansas City for probably in and out the last 30 years since I arrived to the States, primarily because I married a Kansas City girl. So that's kind of kept us grounded here. She's got a wonderful family that it's a big Italian family that keeps us active and busy and engaged in the community and so on. Previously, in one of my previous lives, I was a professional soccer player. So I played in Major League Soccer for 14 years. Did a lot of community work, utilized my platform quite a bit with the league and as a player, just to impact various communities, various causes that needed representation and needed a voice. And I understood very early in my career that I had a platform that could be utilized for the greater good. So my wife and I sort of got on this road to really improve and find ways of improving the lives of others. And that has led to some wonderful discoveries, some wonderful adventures, some great journeys, some big disappointments, but also some great victories, right? And so um, post my playing career, I became an executive. I went into the business world. I went back to school. I got an MBA. Little by little, I kind of phased out of corporate America and understood that my niche and my impact was to be had in a classroom. I was an adjunct professor teaching business classes while I was working in corporate America, and it turned into this really clear vision that I had one day that I needed to be in a place where I was influencing the next generation. And so not focusing so much on community work and charity, but really having direct impact on the decision makers of tomorrow. So that's what I've been doing. I went back to school again and received my doctorate in business and became a full-time professor. So I'm still kind of living in a couple of different worlds, in the soccer world and media world, and yet my full-time job is full-time business teaching.
Yeah, and I love that. You from what I know about you so far, giving back seems to be at the core of who you are. And for those that are family of Dr. Gutierrez, the One Big Thing is all about really helping people that, if I had a demographic, it would be in their 30s and 40s that are, trying to raise kids in today's society, trying to navigate marriage, They are trying to grow professionally, personally, and podcasts are a great way for people to come and get information. And I did not ever want to have a show that just had such successful people on it that it was hard for everyday people to identify with and just share, hey, let's go award by award in your case, because we probably could, all of the amazing things that you've accomplished. It's very hard for somebody who feels like they're barely getting by or struggling in this season to identify with somebody who can seem so far away from them. And what I loved about even just in your intro is there's definitely been some wins. There's definitely been some high water marks in your life, but there's also been some failures, whether it was in soccer or off the field. And so I think getting into this conversation today, my hope as the guest is that I honor you and bring the best out of you for those that love and support you are here, but that for your family and friends, that this would not be your last stop on the one big thing. So much to cover. And if I can remember correctly from our conversation, were you part of the original jump starting of the MLS when it was first started? So the Major League Soccer. So you were a part of kind of, I don't want to call it the initial class, but when that gets started, you were one of the first few players. Is that correct?
Yeah, part of the '96 group, right? So we recently had Lionel Messi in town, which was a big sensation. If you don't know anything about soccer, you probably know that the greatest player that's ever lived, it's playing in our league today, right? And week in and week out, fans from all over the country, wherever my Inter Miami's playing, you're gonna get a glimpse at the guy. He was here in Kansas City a couple weeks ago,
Yep.
and the team here in Kansas City did a great job of helping putting the guys back together. Some of the 96ers that were here. So, literally 29, a little bit over 29 years ago, the franchise, the league opened its opening weekend. And I think there was a weekend of April 13 or something like that. And it just happened to fall on the very first game of our franchise, a game which I was on the field that day. So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it's kind of humbling and it's puzzling to understand that it's almost 30 years, 3 decades that have gone by. But it's so gratifying, such a source of pride to be one of those in the early groups, right? The first pioneers that kind of planted the seed and understood that there was a big, large mission through sport that needed to be accomplished, which was to really establish and grow roots with this league and inspire the next generation of players, the next generation of citizens and humans. And I couldn't be more delighted. The league is light years ahead of what we started, and so it's a great for me. It's a great source of pride.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine probably what it was like from your experience seeing Messi in town and probably the media and the fandom of people that soccer has definitely over the last 15, 20, 30 years with the World Cup. It's brought fans from the USA in where football has always been dominant here. But I have definitely seen how soccer has really grown. But from those early beginnings of 1996, I don't imagine the first time you took the pitch to play soccer, you would have ever probably realized, 30 years later, one of the largest international soccer stars would ever be choosing to play on a field that, for the MLS, when you look at European soccer, just the maturation of the game, if you will. And I think that's a fascinating take because sometimes it's very hard to see, like you said, the seed that you're planting right now can seem so insignificant. And that may not be on a soccer field. That could literally be you didn't come from the healthiest family structure with your parents. And so you vowed that when you got married and had children, you were going to try to write a new narrative for your story. When you're raising young ones and you're raising family, it's really hard to see the full manifestation of what they're going to be like 15, 30 years later in the children's children and generations that they're going to have. And so I think it's very cool that, I've had guests that have been right in the thick of it with me. We're just sharpening each other as we're on this thing. But I've also been graced with people that are, a little bit further ahead of us, looking back and sharing wisdom. So I think it's very neat that you had talked again about that platform that you had, that had given you from those days of 1996 to, I guess, maybe what you were able to do with that platform. Can you walk us through maybe some of the amazing things that you've been able to be a part of because of the platform that came from playing soccer?
Yeah, look, for me, it's as an immigrant. as a young person, um, as a dreamer, right? As a kid that wanted to be this one thing. I can honestly tell you, from the time that I was 3 years old, I knew that I was going to play soccer. That's the one thing that I wanted to do. And now I understand that there's a lot of people that have the same dream. They work tirelessly, they sacrifice, they do all the right things, and somehow it's just not what's meant for them. But I don't know why. I just had I was undersized, I was poor, I grew up in a developing country. The odds were completely stacked against me, right? But somehow I just knew that there was a way that this was going to happen. Yeah, I just felt it in my bones. When people ask me, um, what plan B? What do you think you would have been if you hadn't played soccer? I don't have a response. I truly, honestly don't have a response, because for me, uh, maybe it was the being naive, or the just not being still wet behind the ears. There was no option B. I never even thought about it. For me, failure was not even anywhere near the map, right? And so that for me allowed to gain a mentality while I was growing up, that almost assuming that this was what I was meant to do. When I got there, and one of the hard things to do is to get there. The hardest thing to do is to stay there, right?
Hmm.
Once you arrive, is to stay there. It became a mission of wanting to keep your chair, and little by little it became less, it gravitated less about what it was for me, or that it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for what I could do with that
Hmm.
chair, right? And so I was a young parent. By the age of 25, I had my first one. My wife and I ultimately ended up having three children, but it was like turning a light switch on. All of a sudden, when my first one was born, I understood the what being a parent was, right?
Yeah.
And what being able to provide was about, and what being able to protect was about, and what having a centered family, and having a nucleus, and having something that you gravitate towards every single day when you wake up. uh, I started understanding what that was about, and that sort of shed light on a variety of other things. One of the greatest things that my wife and I ever did was to get involved with one of the campaigns from the United Nations. This came through somebody, a parent from one of the kids' soccer teams who we kind of were friends with. They asked us, for example, why uh, soccer didn't have anything to do with one of the bigger killers in the world, which was malaria, right? At the time, back in the early 2000s, malaria was killing a child every 30 seconds just because of a mosquito bite, and
Hmm.
nobody in the states knew about it. Nobody was involved. Nobody really did much except for nonprofits and larger organizations. The regular citizens, regular Joe, didn't know about it. Professional sports weren't really involved with it, and so it was something that we felt it was a powerful message, just to have somebody donate a little bit of money. A trip to Starbucks is what a bed net would cost, and so we took it upon ourselves to start really carrying that message. And little by little, we started really raising some meaningful money through the team. Then we were accompanied by Major League Soccer itself. Then it became something larger. So we were now partnered up with the United Nations Foundation, and with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and with US Soccer, and with FIFA. And it ultimately became the official campaign for the 2010 World Cup, which
Wow.
was United Against Malaria. And so that little thing raised millions and millions of dollars, and ultimately, and ended up having great impact. So just an example of when you open your mind, that what the things that God can do, and the way that He can utilize what you're doing, the spot, the moment in time, the people around you. It can really do some powerful things.
Well, I maybe that's a challenge, right? Is we can try to manufacture open doors. Because I think many of us, like you, are dreamers to some degree. It may not be to ever be a soccer player. The dream may be to be a mom or a dad, or start our own business, or just to become something. There's people out there that don't know what it is, but they want to be something. They want to make a difference. And I think when you have that mentality, a couple of things I was thinking about as you're talking is I think it's okay not to have a plan B. I think sometimes we can want to avoid risk by thinking of alternative solutions. And there's definitely wisdom to be had in navigating a course and, hey, if this doesn't work out, like we should try this. But if you don't have a plan B in life because you're so passionate and you're sprinting in one direction, that's okay too. And so I think you as a person have to be able to navigate and filter through your thought pattern of when is it appropriate to have a plan B? Like, does this current situation in my life call for me to have a backup plan if this doesn't work? But just because you do or you don't doesn't make you right or wrong, as much as, no one would behoove you as an individual for not having a backup plan. But I think what's cool in your story is you heard of a need, and it wasn't like you went out and you solved it immediately. You heard of a need that, pricked your heart, convicted you, and you probably just took a step of obedience in a direction and had no idea that that was going to open the door to, Bill and Melinda Gates and some of the things that you just mentioned. Because if we probably got to see all the things that God actually had in store for us, it would cripple us and crush us,
Sure.
because our human instinct is to want it now, achieve it now, and tell ourselves that we can handle the things that God has for us.
Yeah.
But what I've discovered is many times the things that I've prayed and believed for, miracles, long seasons of prayer, even the deals I've made with God, which no one really ever wants to talk about. God, if you'll do this thing for me, I'll give my life to you. God, if you'll do this thing, I'll do XYZ. And what many times happens is God does the thing, and then we don't fulfill what we said we were going to do, because it's very hard on the opposite side of an open door to understand the full ramification of what it's going to feel like and the person you're going to be. And I think sometimes we skip the maturation process that happens through the small steps of obedience. You and I are both fathers. You have 3, I have 4. I know in this season of my life with my kids, there's certain things that would be inhumane to do to my children or to expect of them. But I have to at least begin to model the behavior that I want. And when I show them something, allow them as a dad to love them and correct them, but realize once they've, mastered this, now to introduce more, whatever that may be. I think sometimes when it comes to a faith journey or the vision for our life, we sometimes bypass all of that and we just want it now. That I think in your experience, talking about a World Cup and all of that, I mean, what has that been like? Or if you could give advice to somebody right now who is a, Diego 20 years ago that had a vision, whether it was sports or not, but just had a cause on their heart, a belief in their bones that they were going to make a difference. Like if you could help somebody understand what it's all about, or the way to begin to think, or even like, how do you even begin to position yourself
Yeah.
to change the world? I think we all want to make a difference, but like, what is step one? Is there anything from your journey that you've learned that you think would be very cool to share backwards? Let's take a break to hear a word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by the Unleashing Leadership Podcast. Join Travis Moss, seasoned entrepreneur and business leader, on a transformational journey of leadership exploration. In this thought-provoking podcast, Travis shares his invaluable insights and experiences gained from 2 decades of managing diverse businesses, which include small family enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, and his own successful startups. Through candid storytelling and real-life examples, he unveils the profound truth that success or failure ultimately rests upon a leader's ability to recognize and unleash the potential in others. Start listening to the Unleashing Leadership Podcast today, available on all major podcast platforms.
Well, first, I'd like to allude, an example to what you're referring to in terms of, the weight. If we had full, imagine if we had full visibility into some of the things that we will ultimately in our lives become responsible for, right?
Yeah.
So if you are if you're telling a young parent, this is what your son will become, right? Or your daughter, or this is what your marriage will look like. Number one, the anticipation, the pressure, whether it's healthy or not, uh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe levels of anxiety will set at some point will set in, because you will know that at this point this will have to be done and will look a certain way, right? And
Hmm.
so by having that visibility, you're almost taking away the freedom of wanting to operate without any pressure whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we don't often think about. You ask me, what would you advise somebody that's just starting, or a regular person, they're thinking about this? The only thing that I could say is you have to live day by day. You can't cut corners. You can skip steps. What's meant for you is meant for you. I fully understand and know by now that there is a divine order to every single thing that happens in our lives, right? The people that we meet, the things that we ingest, the experiences that we have with other people, the relationships that we either embrace or reject. All of those things are already organized, right? They have a divine order. I really, really believe that.
Yep.
So we have to give ourselves the space and the runway to be able to look at things and take risks, and make decisions, and take specific freedoms, and yes, plan, but at the same time live in the moment.
Yeah, and I think the divine order is something that I believe in too, because I believe my entire life, my 37 years, God has ultimately always tried to get my attention. I think sometimes the delivery mechanism he uses, I don't identify in the moment because it doesn't seem very divine.
Sure.
And I think maybe that's where the misplacement comes from. The friend that has something that they want to share with you, because it wasn't surrounded by angels and a cloud of light and a storm, but was just a side conversation at a practice, we can so easily dismiss because we didn't take the time to weigh what was said to us. I think some of us are believing that when God speaks or God opens a door, it's going to be this majestic, aha, there you are moment. And many times it's the lyrics of a song, it's the unexpected text, it's the friend that calls you, it's the billboard on the way somewhere. And what I have realized is I'm not a sensational spiritual seeker. My day is not, God, where are you in this room? Are you in the fly that, just so you guys know, won't stop flying around my room right now? And that's not like God trying to get my attention. We can sometimes overdo it to the other side too, where we're looking for like the spiritual meaning of everything that we're just no earthly good. And so I think for me personally, and having this conversation with you is great today, is like, what do I do with new information that's presented to me when I like don't fully understand what it is? And am I creating enough space for self-reflection that even if in that moment, Diego, if you found me at a ball field and try to have a conversation with me, I'm probably going to be trying to get four kids into a van simultaneously and like partly listening to you and part like disciplining my kids. And my wife will tell me like, stop yelling to get in the van. But I can still, even if in that moment wasn't fully engaged with you because I was taking care of my priority, am I creating space though later on to say, self, like, remember Diego said something to you earlier today, like, God, is that you? Like, is there something that I need to do with what he said? Because when you put yourself out there, this has probably been your experience too. When you put yourself out there, when you want to make a change, when you want to make a difference, I believe you attract opportunities all the time
Sure.
because you're seen, you're visible, people want to talk to you. But it doesn't mean that every opportunity is the right opportunity. It's the God opportunity. And so you had talked about failure in your life. And I don't know that failure is always just like, I blew it, I did evil intent. Sometimes it's just I listened to the wrong voice. I did something that I didn't really consult in prayer and I just ran with it and it fell on my face. It's not always like I murdered somebody. So, like in your world, when you talked about failure, because your life has been crowned with so many high watermark achievements through the Gates Foundation. If I'm correct, I believe you were awarded by President Bush for a pretty prestigious award, which I'd love to hear about that, for giving back in your humanitarian efforts. So, like, you've done it. You're still doing it. You're still giving back, but you also mentioned failure. And so I think it's interesting to talk about when you look back on your life, like how do you make sense of the wrong turns, wrong directions? And was there anything that you've learned along the way that's helped you repivot as fast as you can once you've identified, like, shoot, this didn't go the way I wanted it to go?
Yeah, failures. I always, anytime there's failure in my life, regardless of how it's manifested itself, I always try to think of one thing that my mother would always used to say to me is that God doesn't waste anything, right?
Hmm.
And so I try to keep that perspective. There's no waste of anything. Even
Yep.
when you fail, you're learning. Even when you fail, there are things to harvest from that, right? Your failure may mean success for somebody else. And that's just the way it is meant to be. I've learned a lot about failure just from being on team sports,
Yep.
right? I can take care of my body, I can do everything well. But one of my teammates didn't have a good day or didn't really come to work with the right mentality on that day or what have you, and we didn't get the result that we wanted. Does one, despite the fact that we ended up, let's say, losing or failing, there's a maturation process that's taking place regardless, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I then look at the sport of wrestling, which my son is a wrestler. He's a collegiate wrestler. I have the utmost respect for wrestling. Why? Because you handle failure in a completely different way in that sport, right?
Yep.
So when you get into that circle and you start to wrestle and you come up short against somebody that bested you, there's no teammates to blame. There's nobody to look at. You're only looking at the actions that you had previous, during, and after that encounter, right?
Hmm.
So you're actually processing failure in a very different way than you are in a team setting. And so over time, I think I've learned to take failure as not that it doesn't sting, not that it doesn't feel like failure, but in a way where it keeps my mind open to, okay, what is it that I need to get from this? What is it that I need to learn?
Hey everyone, Steve Campbell. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If it's made an impact on you, I would love to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. But I would also love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review. Your ratings and review help other listeners know that this show is worth their time. So thank you so much for tuning into The One Big Thing, and let's enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, and if you're not on a team, if you got a spouse and 2 or 3 kids, man, you got a team of 5, whether you realize it or not. And I'll tell you that kind of in the same way, you can, try to prepare yourself as a dad, as a mom, to put yourself in position and take your kids with you at a place, and the whole thing can get blown up because your kids are kids. And they're the teammate that didn't show up. They're the teammate that didn't do what they said or ran around the restaurant. And the next thing you know, you wanted to create this experience. You wanted to look back. You wanted to create this memory with your family. And there were some things that maybe were a little bit beyond your control from your other team members that forced you to respond. But I got to imagine, even in the difficulty of, correcting your kids at dinner or at an event or a family member situation that's not going right, how many of us really pause to reflect post that moment without our spouse coming to us and being like, Diego, don't talk to the kids like that again in public, and then you feel ashamed and you're upset. But if you did raise your voice, if you did react in a way, like, are you creating that space later on at the nighttime or whenever on the weekend to be like, man, I could have responded. I was a little too impatient.
Yeah.
And why? Why? Because you had an expectation. Like you built this idea up in your mind. And I love what's about your story, which I can tell you from some of the other guests I've had on. They had every intent of having a vision of being an NFL quarterback. They had every intent of being the star player at Notre Dame playing soccer, and they blew their knee out, or the coaching staff didn't set them up for success. I'm thinking about Christian Ponder that I had on my show and just what he went through. Life can sometimes hand us cards in situations that we never asked for, but we still have to respond. And what I think maybe what I hear as I talk with people is they're struggling to really make sense of the situations and moments that don't make a lot of sense and how to recover quicker. And I would imagine that in soccer, after a game, you probably had a routine for recovery because you had to be ready to go. I wonder how many of us lack. I'm not talking about like taking cold plunges in the morning, but just like in your day to day as a dad, as a mom in the work field, when something doesn't go right at work, what is your detoxing? What does your rehab look like that can allow you to show up the next day better? And so, is there anything like in your life that's translated from the sports field or just even in your own mental psyche that you do that's like helped you recover quicker or get back to a place realizing that, your spouse and your kids depend on you? Like, is there something that you do in a day to day or in a week basis that's an outlet or a way that just helps you think through what you're thinking about?
Sure, sure. Again, I'm gonna sort of relate a lot of my responses to athletics because I
That's
feel
okay.
like athletics have always taught me so many lessons. I continue to this day to learn about life from the games. And when I talk about the games, I'm talking about sports in general. Um, you know, Soccer, for example, it's a game of mistakes. You look at a guy like Messi, he doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes, but it's I still had a pretty decent career, not because of the things that I did great, but because how quickly I was able to recover from those mistakes, right? So we understanding that the game itself is a game of mistakes, very much like baseball. Hey, listen, by the way, 70% of the time you're gonna swing and miss.
Yeah.
That's the preface of the entire sport. In fact, if you hit 4 out of 10, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. You're not even going to hit half of them, and you're still going to be in the Hall of Fame, right? So you enter understanding that just like life, there's going to be some mistakes along the way. The question is, how quickly do you recover from them,
Hmm.
and what are the methods that you use to really recover from that? Do you have the ability to wake up the next day and say, you know what? Yesterday was crap, but today is going to be good. And here's how I'm going to make it good. And are you intentional about those things? Right? Not the cold plunge, not any of those things, but am I in the right frame of mind tomorrow to wake up and say, I'm going to make it better than yesterday? In fact, I'm going to start planning my steps to make sure that I'm deciphering a formula that's going to make me successful. Right? This is something that I do pretty much every day with all of my students. I have students anywhere from 19 years old, 20 years old that are juniors and seniors in college, all the way to executives that come back to sharpen the blade at 60 years old, right? And there's a lot of overlap between the experiences that they have, whether they're a senior vice president or a CEO of a company, or like I said, a junior in high school. Failure is a part of all of their lives. Fear of failure is always a part of their lives. One of the things that I love to talk about with my students is, are you conscious? Are you really conscious, and are you intentional about who you are as a person? Right. And what I mean by that is, do you understand yourself thoroughly in terms of, for example, the things that you like, the things that you're good at? Do you understand yourself enough to understand what you're good at and what you're not good at? Right? Because I can want to be an NFL quarterback, but I'm 5'8" and I weigh 170 pounds. I'm probably not going to make it. Right. So the odds are, so understanding the things that I'm good at, the things that I like, the things that I'm passionate about. Um, are you a person that is passionate about what you're doing? Are you passionate about your job? Are you passionate about your studies? I had a teammate. Um, I'm not going to say his name, but I had a teammate who was very good at soccer, was not passionate about soccer. So
Hmm.
oftentimes I would come into training and this person was not into training at all. Therefore, he wasn't contagious with his enthusiasm. He wasn't really great at training, but in the games he would come out and he was a big physical guy, what have you. He had all the tools. He just wasn't passionate about it. He was in the league maybe 2 or 3 years and he became a very successful in a completely different field, extremely successful. So understanding what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and understanding more or less where you're meant to be, discovering and being present in the discovery of that journey, it's something that I always encourage my students to really be intentional about. and brainstorm. Because if you're taking self inventory and really understanding uh, if where you're trying to go matches with who you are and what you have in terms of the tools, um, the odds are going to increase a little bit more for you.
I had a spiritual mentor years ago. Um, 2020 was a transition year for many people across the
Sure.
globe with COVID, the pandemic. My wife and I relocated. Some people changed jobs. Some people made a major shift of working from an office to working at home. Some of us decided to move across town, whatever it may be. Have we allowed ourselves to digest these massive life changes that when you're in it, you just go and you make a decision and you make another decision, but you don't ever really count the cost or think about like what you've actually done. And I think then what happens is this manifests itself. I know for me, some days when I'm just alone in the car driving around, where it just like hits you, where it's like, this is life. And all of a sudden you're like, man, what's like, why am I off today? And it's because I had this spiritual mentor years ago who said, one of my other guests, Scott, had talked about we about 18 every month. I don't want to butcher what he said. Is it 18 months we experience a crisis? In every few years we experience a life crisis, where life is constantly changing. But then we all throughout our lifetime will experience 6 or 7 major life crises. Those could be a birth, a death, a relocate. Like they could be job changes, what have you. Those are like drinking massive cups of coffee. And then all of a sudden your heart is pounding one day and you don't know why. And so I love what you had said. And here's the personal application for me and what I've done. If you've never addressed those questions that, Dr. Gutierrez just said, like, who are you? What are you passionate about? Are you somebody who is just kind of going all the time? You're not doing anything wrong. You get up, you take care of your kids, you get ready for work, you drop them off, you go to work, you come home, you make dinner, you go to bed, the ball field, and it starts all over. Are you just kind of going through things? But then also, when we talked about failure a few minutes ago, what are you running to when failure sets in?
Yeah.
When something doesn't go right, when you blow it, are you taking the time to digest what happened, or are you running to your cell phone and just endlessly scrolling? Like, are you turning to food? Are you coping in another way? So if you combine these few things together, how we respond to failing, failure is such a strong word, failings in our life. Like, how are we responding to failings in our life in a way that's healthy and allows us to like, what did I have anything to do with it? If not, there's grace, move on. If it's, I did do something and I'm guilty of that, how do we course correct so that doesn't happen again? Like, start to think through that. So how do we deal with failings? But then how do you bounce back and position yourself every day knowing that, like, how are you wired? Have you even asked the one who created you how you're wired? Or are you just doing stuff? And then wondering why you can play the game, but you're not passionate about it. And I wonder, we've never been on a pitch with you. I wonder how many people are just going through marriage. They're doing it, but they're not passionate about it. They're going through raising kids. They're doing it, but they're not passionate about it. And like, what if we could use this framework that you just shared to understand how we're wired and really begin to think about these things so that we are being more proactive every single day and being consciously aware that there is a divine order to things we've been talking about. And I'm wired in such a way to respond to certain environments and to do certain things. It's going to be very rare that God is going to hand you, a hand and just pull you completely out of your situation, which I think is probably secretly our prayer in some way when we're going through hard things, like, get me out of this. But what God will do is open one door, and that one door will lead to another door as you walk in obedience. And so as I'm thinking about the listener in your story, it's like, what is that thing that maybe has repeated over to you when you pray or comes back to mind that maybe you need to start listening to? And it might have nothing to do with your family or your kids. It could be a response to malaria, but you never know kind of where that open door is going to come from. And so a big part of how I've done this is through journaling. I'm a huge advocate of journaling because life, folks, is sometimes not fair. It does not make sense. In my journal, I have about 7 of them in my living room outside of this room, chock full of good days, bad days, or just things that have happened to me. And yet, if you read through my journals over all of these years, there is one constant. It's how faithful God is to me. And I think whether you believe what Diego and I believe or not, that's okay. But if there is something bigger than this, when I journal and I reflect on words that I've written, high water marks, times I absolutely blew it, times where I didn't know Steph and I were going to make it, times when our kids went through things. When I look back and I read about that, it gives me grace to handle the season of life I'm in right now, where it's like when you're in it, it seems like this is the worst it's ever going to be. And then you look back at the words you wrote, not somebody else's story. I could read Diego's journey, journal and journey and be like, oh, that was cool. You went through that. But when I read my own words and I'm like, man, I forgot 6 years ago we went through XYZ. Journaling has been, something that's helped me. So is there anything like that, journaling or personal application, that's helped you? Is there anything, that you do that kind of for that reflective time helps you?
I do. My wife and I are very different in terms of how we deal with things, right? So she's the
Most
type of
of us
person
are.
she's the type of person that is highly social. She needs the social engagement. She wants to have people around her all the time. That comforts her. It soothes her. And by the way, it matches who she is, right? She's
Yeah.
just highly energetic. I'm on the opposite end. I am what I would consider an extroverted introvert, right? So I'll go to the barbecue and I'll have a good time. You just have a tough time getting me out the door, right? And so I'm giving that example so that kind of people can understand the type of personality that I am. I love solitude. I love introspection. I like times for myself, whether it is I'm going for a drive or I'm walking on a treadmill at the gym or I'm playing golf by myself. It's my opportunity to really have some introspection and at times have some prayer and at times just plan and try to understand why some things are happening or how things could happen. Just that time alone to be able to think and step away from phones, from computers, from grading, from students, from soccer, from everything else. Those little things for me are what kind of recharges my battery. That time alone for me is super important.
Well, and I think you've been into places that some of us will have never gone. Whether it's in the MLS, whether it's with the Gates, whether it's with President Bush. What about, because this is interesting, when you don't know what tomorrow holds, but you're presented with an opportunity through podcasting. I have this all the time. People that have been on the show connect me with other people, and you kind of pinch yourself that you get an opportunity to interview somebody. And the next thing you know, you're, in your podcast studio and you see the name is ready to come in and you just like take a deep breath and you're like, don't be a dork. You got this. Act like you've been here before. And you like let them in. And then it takes you like 10, 15 minutes of like inwardly breathing of like, just be cool, act normal, because podcasting is a unique platform. So in your world, I mean, I got to imagine meeting President Bush and Bill Gates and some of these people. They're larger, they're real people, but they are larger than life people. Like as you meet new people along your journey, whether they can do anything for you or not, has there been anything that as you've stepped into some of these stages has helped you win with people? I don't know if that makes sense. It would be very easy for many of us to see an opportunity in front of us and then like want to get everything from it because we're looking for an open door. We're looking for a break in the season. How do you navigate, like when God does open a door for you to people that are many times like kind of beyond where you are, like how do you navigate those relationships to allow your authentic self to be there without manipulating, without getting in the way, and without, do you understand kind of where I'm going with
Yeah,
this
yeah.
idea?
I think I understand where you go, and the answer to that, Steve, is I don't know. I don't know because, for example, I was honored by President Bush on the Rose Garden back in I don't know, maybe 15, 17 years ago, right around 2007, something like that. And I was sitting at the Rose Garden with the commissioner of our league. And I was just thinking to myself, how did I even get here?
Hmm.
I'm a poor kid from Colombia. How am I sitting at the Rose Garden being honored by the most powerful person on this planet? Right. A little bit after that, a few months after that, I was named to the Presidential Council for Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition, which President Bush appointed me to. I served under President Obama as well. Or I'm speaking at the Gates Foundation. Listen to this one. I'm speaking at the Gates Foundation. I'm on a panel with the person who has deciphered the human genome, right? And I'm going, okay, what could I possibly contribute to these conversations? And I think that the nature of me being there was precisely the person, right? Precisely the purpose of the entire thing, because I feel like somebody that was wanting to voice a campaign out of conviction as a human being, out of understanding social injustice, out of wanting to create and drive change and have impact in society. Those genuine thoughts were the fire that were putting me on those chairs.
Hmm.
Now, don't ask me about the mechanisms of how that went because I don't know. All of a sudden, I received a call and it was from the White House. I thought I was getting punked, right? And so I went through the whole process of interviewing, and the entire for 2 months, I'm going, what is happening? Am I going to be like on a show, and everybody's going to be laughing, or is this? And it turned out to be very, very real, right? And so when you say, well, what? How do you stay poised? What? I have no idea. I don't know why it happened. I know it happened, and I know that a lot of great things came from it. A lot of personal lessons, of course, needless to say, came about. Hugely enriching in terms of life. Um, but the one thing that I think was God made was the ability to drive impact and impact people on the other side of the world that I've never met and I probably will never meet, and just being a conduit, a connector, a source of inspiration. My wife and I, and the role that soccer played in bringing that change and hopefully a more fulfilling life for thousands or millions of people.
What what does a call from the White House sound like? Is it just your phone rings and when you pick up they say White House, please hold? Like who's making that call?
Yeah,
And you know what I mean? Like how do you even in a world today, work through that? But I love what you said because again, you're a little further ahead of me. I've always had this Bible verse from Proverbs. It says the Lord will use your gifts to bring you before great men. And there are just certain verses in the Bible that, for me, when I read it, they feel like
yeah,
they're mine, and not in an egotistical way, but just like God can do it.
yeah,
And even I've got to taste it a little bit with this, but there's a maturation. Full disclosure: if I would have had this opportunity, this platform 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have screwed it up because I had a dream in a vision that, many times in my prayer time I felt was from the Lord, but I was always trying to make it happen faster than I think God was ready for. So I would meet somebody in business or a famous person, and my mind would be like, how am I going to do it? Like, what's the thing? And you kind of mentioned this early on in the show. If we could see all the things that God was going to do, timelines, we would squander so many things trying to make it happen. And 10, 15 years ago, I would have done that. I would have been trying to weave my way into a conversation to get them to be impressed with me, to hopefully have them say, like, I'd love to introduce you to this person and feel good about it. And God, I don't know, years ago really corrected my heart. And this is what I love. If you are really open to wanting to become all that God has called you to be, and you are open to correction, not from another person, but God, if there's anything in my heart that is not of you, that is not your best. Please help me understand that. And God really did put on my heart,
Yeah.
you have a tendency to want to manipulate people, not maliciously, but because you are trying to manufacture a door that I'm not ready to open for you.
I see. Yeah.
And it took me years of then like dealing with that and being like, oh my gosh, I never realized I was doing this, to really just get grounded again and be like, I still believe in the verse you gave me that you'll open great doors, but I don't want to blow it again. And now I can see now through doing the podcast, like some of these doors that God's opening, it's a totally different reaction on my end now. You
Right.
know, when somebody's like, I want to introduce you to somebody, I'm like, cool, that's what God does. It's not like, oh, great. Like,
Organically, though.
yeah,
It almost
yep.
feels like it's happened effortlessly. That's very much what happened to us as well. We went from, yeah, hey, let me let me hold a fundraiser with our club, and the club was supportive of it. And then all of a sudden we went to the league and said, wait, what? Why are we just limiting this to the club or in Chicago? Let's talk about the league and see if they want to, support us. And um, the league at that time didn't even have a charitable arm. There was nothing that was engaging the sport with the community. And through our work, we essentially called the league and said, "Hey, we want to use your logos because we're going to have this little fundraiser, blah blah blah." And they said, "I don't think so." So I called the commissioner and I said, "Listen, I'm going to do this, and so whether you want to get on board or not, I'm going to do this." And all of a sudden, it was like a light switch, and the league became extremely supportive of the campaign. It was the league that started the charitable arm for the entire the league. It was the campaign that started the charitable league, or excuse me, the charitable arm for the league. And so that opened a huge other amount of other campaigns. So anti-racism campaigns, you name it. 10, 15 have come and gone in the last 30 something years. So it goes back to, um, if you do things with a clean heart and you do it in a way that feels organic and that you're not pushing and you're not forcing, um, you'll be surprised how easily things sort of unfold.
And you got to give yourself some grace and a bounce back period. You know, if you were somebody who's blown it and you've used people, family, friends, whatever,
Sure.
to get ahead in life, like that happens. You're human. It's what have you learned from it and how can you be more authentic? And I just, through the course of this conversation, I'll give you some time here to start thinking about your start, stop, continue here in a minute or two. But I'm thinking about like you've been such a planter of seeds in your life, whether it was being part of the 96 class and getting the MLS off the ground and now seeing Lionel Messi come and play, or never having this charitable arm and fighting for what you believed in, and now probably having, I'm sure they're not just focused on malaria. I'm sure, soccer as it's evolved over the years has changed and opened themselves up to other causes that they support. You were a part of that, but you were also simultaneously playing soccer presently because that's what God had gifted you to do. And so I think it's like in our life, what would it look like to really understand of all the roles, responsibilities, and things that we are doing now, being able to like step back and say, is this a present thing that I have to give my all to? Is this something I need to plant a seed for the future that I may never see? Or is it time for me to harvest what somebody else before me has set? And if 30 and 40-year-olds can get the depth of what I just shared with you about the reality of that, the legacy you're building with your family got to be fully present as a mom and dad. But you got to also have a long-term view of generations to come, and then also honor those who have, kind of come before you. So if we can figure that part out in life, understanding, is this now, is this for tomorrow, or is this me reaping what somebody else has done? I think that would be awesome. So start, stop, continue, and I'll give you a minute here in case there's anything else you want to add for those that are here with Dr. Gutierrez. Fun way at the end of the show that I let people get to know our guests and things they're working on. They give me a start, stop, continue action. But anything before we even jump into that we kind of left unsaid or you think would be good to go over?
No, I think we've covered a great amount of topics. I think we've had some pretty profound points that we've made. So I'm ready when you are.
Yeah. All right. So then what you can do is give me the action. I want to start, I want to stop, and then whatever the corresponding action you want to take with that.
Okay. Well, in terms of starting, right? I've been in this in professional sports for 30 years. I've also been trying to utilize the platform even now as a member of the media, right? And so I've been in soccer as a player. I've been a front office executive. I used to be the sporting director in Philadelphia. After that, I became a member of the press. So I did TV for Fox Sports and ESPN, and I still do radio, right? And so just recently, or I was privileged enough to be part of a group of people that co-authored the league's intercultural awareness program. And what that's meant to do is meant to enhance and increase the positive level of relationships amongst players and anybody that's involved with the sport, right? And so it's meant to reduce incidents of racism, prejudice, any kind of discrimination. Period. And so I was able to implement or help implement this initiative in the months of January, February, to pretty much a lot of the teams in the league. By the way, Inter Miami included. So I got to deal with the players and the coaches and so on. It was an unbelievable experience. I had separated myself from the sport while I was going to school and becoming this thing that I thought I wanted to become, which was a professor. Right. This is what I'm actively doing now. But I want to start again uh, to identify. And I want to start identifying little pockets where I may be able to make a contribution. So this engagement with the league again sort of sparked my taste and my curiosity for where are those other places where I can make a meaningful contribution.
Love that. All right. How about either a stop or a continue?
Stop. In terms of taking a personal inventory, I mentioned that previously. Um, I- I'll be 52 years old this year, and I still find pockets of time where I procrastinate. And so I want to challenge myself to stop procrastinating and becoming more effective.
Love that.
That's a
And how about
personal.
a yeah, yeah. Well, in let's pause right there for a second, right? Because if I just had a friend of mine and I listed out all of your accolades and that was it, to hear that you struggle with procrastination doesn't fit the very high level highlights that you would go through. Like you would think you've battled malaria, being honored by the president, you've been with the Gateses. Like that's what I love about this action at the end because it humanizes all of us. That you can do these incredible things in your life, which we honor you for, and still honestly assess that I still probably procrastinate a little too much. So that's going to help somebody. And then we gotta continue.
My continue has to do with life, and I tell you why. For the last couple of months, again, I'm 50. I'll be 52 this year. What that means is that uh, my parents' generation, and
Hmm.
even some of the members of my generation, I've been having to deal with mortality, right? You're starting to see some relatives, people my dad and my mom's age, or even people my age that are becoming ill and or passing away, right? And so there's a sense of responsibility for me because I still want to be around for a while, and I want to be around long enough to meet my kids and their kids as well. I need to continue to exercise. I need to continue taking care of my body. I need to continue to pursue the things about myself that I'm inquisitive about. There's areas of me that I don't quite understand yet, and I need to be a little bit more curious about those.
Well, you had mentioned it, earlier on when you have a kid, your eyes just get opened to the world
Yeah,
in a way that even though people tell you parenthood will change you until you have your own child or adopted child, in your hand, which, hey, little shout out for anybody who's considering adoption. There's a lot of kids out there that need somebody to love on them. So if that's something God's put on your heart, be faithful, be obedient. But also just mortality. Ever since I became a dad, dude, I'm a crier. I'm a cry. I'm a
Same.
crier at like the most random things. I watched. Have you ever seen Coco by Disney?
Yeah.
I remember watching that movie when it first came out with my kids, and they were sitting on the couch in front of me, and they get to the end of the movie, and he's singing with Mama Coco, and remember me, and
Yeah.
she wakes up, dude. My kids had no idea. I'm behind them bawling,
Yeah.
bawling, ugly tears, hyperventilating, watching Mama Coco sing. And it's been like moments where I'm just crying. And you know what? Because it's almost like there's a sensitivity now inside of me that I don't want to say didn't exist, but new opportunities will reveal new parts of who you are. And I think becoming a father has changed me in a way that I screw up a lot. I make mistakes, but I would say there's a sensitivity now that exists. And when you talked about mortality, I created this show because there's a lot of people that need encouragement right now. There's a lot of people that may not be on a deathbed, but they don't feel alive. They're just
Yeah.
doing stuff. And like, what would it look like for one person at a time listening to this show to wake up and realize you got breath in your lungs? There's still time to go. Make the most of it. And I think I'll throw this to you. We didn't talk about this. So if you don't got this, I'll cut it out of the show. You have, from some of my guests that I've talked to, you probably have one of the most prolific experiences across 30 years of the people that God has opened the door. I love that it had nothing to do. Soccer was the platform, but because of the work with malaria that opened the door for the Rose Garden and all of that. So it's
Yeah.
not, you use the platform that you had to make a difference in the world. And I wonder how many of us are looking at the platform as this is what I'm going to do when maybe God's got something through that platform to do. So I wonder if there's a word of encouragement you can give to a person that may never be before Bill and Melinda Gates or ever before George W. Bush or like whoever, to help them raise their expectations of what God can do, knowing you came from where you came from and growing up poor and just being in those situations. Like, how can we leave the listener with a word of encouragement here at the end to not manufacture like what we've talked about and force things to happen, but just like how to raise your sales, how to raise your expectation that God can do incredible things still in the story that He's writing for your life?
I think that the best way that I could probably put it is alluding again to the self inventory, the self inventory piece, right? I despite the fact that you've highlighted a lot of the things that a lot of the accolades that I've received, um, a lot and my name is in the Hall of Fame, or my name was on that list for the Presidential Council, or whatever the prize has been. But it's been about a team, right? It's been about my marriage and my wife's driving force, and what my kids mean to me, and the conviction that I felt that, for example, when I had a 3 or 4 year old son, that there were parents on the other side of the world just because they didn't have $5, their kids were perishing, right? All these connections and all of those things came together for me at a specific time. And just like you said, they wouldn't have come together. They wouldn't have been as impactful for me at 24 because I wouldn't have had my kids.
Hmm.
I truly believe that things come to you at the right moment in time. You can't accelerate the process. You can't read the cliff notes and go to the culmination of the book, right? But at the same time, you have to be able to plant seed and watch them grow and enjoy that process also. For those that are listening, um, what you don't want to do is be so worried about planting seed and watching the results that you don't enjoy the journey along the way.
Yeah.
The journey is the beautiful thing. It's not the price. I've had the price. It's not the price. Is not the outcome at the end. It's the actual road and how you get there. It's the everyday getting up, right? Is that movie that you watched that made you cry? That specific moment, all of it, when you roll it together, I've learned that whole thing in this area or this stage or era of my life that I'm living and going through right now. It's changed so much, Steve. I can tell you, when I was in my 30s, I was still playing. My goal was to finish my career the best way possible. When late 30s, early 40s, it was about how can I maximize my corporate life and my career and earn as much as I can. I'm now into my 50s, and the vision is different. The vision is about legacy. The vision is about what am I leaving for my kids? What is
Mhm.
it that I want people to remember me by? Because in reality, when you look at a guy like me, you're looking at maybe 10, 15 years of real high productivity, and that's about it, right? That's going to be about it. And so you at that point you'll probably start slowing down. For those that are out there that are in their 30s and 40s, enjoy the journey.
Mhm.
Enjoy the little victories, build on the little victories, and don't be too hard on yourself.
Yeah, as we bring this one to a close, I wonder how many of us are treating life like Candyland, where we're hoping to spin the right color or get the right card and jump forward 30, 40 spots.
Yeah,
Life is like Candyland, that if you do that, you're eventually going to hit the one spot that makes you go down the ladder and go back.
yeah, sure.
Doesn't mean that God is punishing you, but I believe that, like you said early on in the show, like your mom told you, every failing, every disappointment can be covered in grace and opportunity if you'll allow yourself to see that. So, Diego, Dr. Gutierrez, I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate you running with me. I never would have imagined, even at 24, 25, now in my almost late 30s, that I'd ever have the opportunity to interview, speak with, and become friends with Hall of Famers and world changers. But now my goal is to bring the best out of your story to encourage somebody who's coming up behind us to make one good decision at a time. So appreciate you being my guest on the One Big Thing podcast for your family and friends. I hope you'll check out some of our other guests. And if there's anybody, I'll give this to the listeners too. If there's anybody that you've always loved to hear their behind the scenes story, shoot me an email. Reach out to me. You can visit nqrmedia.com. NQR Media is who produces this show. So nqrmedia.com. Find the One Big Thing. Send me an email. But Diego, I appreciated your time, your transparency, and just sharing your self-reflection. So thanks for being on.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.